have my topic in front of me, so I'm all good to announce that. We are ready to go. Frank, Joshua,
Yeah.
shall we embark? Without forgetting, I'll go ahead and start the recording over here. I'll cue in our music. I'll turn up the music and say welcome to another episode of Friendology. Smaller cast here today. I am Biniam. This is Joshua. This is Frank. We're missing Roger, and of course Rob as well. But we are thrilled to have you guys joining in on today's conversation. Today we are talking about various ways of communicating care in male friendships. This is sparked by. We'll talk about that as we get into the podcast. But so thankful to have you on this 14th episode. Today is the 1st of November 2021. And so we're going to spend the next hour talking about this most important theme. We'd love to hear your thoughts as you're listening in. Thanks for joining in. Woohoo! My other podcast that I facilitated has a much longer theme. Yeah, a longer intro. So I'm always reminding myself, how much time do I have to be able to say what I need to say? So Joshua, you were there when I proposed this topic. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
No, because I don't remember. So
We were sitting on the couch over there with our dear Roger.
Yes,
so he is really going to be miffed that he missed out this opportunity to join in this conversation because I think he had some things to say.
Mm-hmm.
But he is busy or in a busy spell at work. We were talking about how thankful we were for the friendships that we share, especially in the context of the group that we have been nurturing these friendships for some time. And especially on the theme of this podcast, Friendology, where it is very intentional, saying, hey, we want to consider what friendship looks like, especially amongst guys. Because in my experience, in my observation, this is a zone where there's a lot more influence from the cultural standards that inhibits what could be when we're connecting together in expressions of, hey, what does it look like to be a friend amongst guys? Now, we've talked in past podcasts about how it's easy for kids to say, hey, I'm interested in you, let's go hang out, let's play. But something happens as we grow older, especially amongst guys, where we're saying, we're not supposed to do this or say this or express this because this is culturally taboo. And I think some of those expressions sort of inhibit and become an obstacle to what could be, especially because we're more informed externally by those perspectives that others set, and we're not able to freely explore and say, hey, what does that look like, to come along and say, brother, I appreciate you, and invade each other's space in ways that, like, I know sometimes as people are watching our podcast, the video portion, you'll see we're on one couch. Sometimes there's 4 of us squeezed in. We're like really comfy against each other, where that would be a really uncomfortable thing for so many guys, right? Because they're like, oh, I need space because this is kind of like, I don't want to be seen in this context, right?
Right.
So that's why I wanted to develop. I wanted us to address this theme of how we can express care in the context of friendships amongst men, and how we can liberate some of those parameters that sometimes it seems people sign up for. How can we do that even for ourselves? What are those areas that we may feel uncomfortable with or vulnerable with, especially expressing in public versus not in public, right?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of like the evolution for why we're talking about this theme today.
Can I perhaps start off by bringing up a word that relates with this word of expression of care,
Sounds
the
good.
word being care,
Okay.
Which is the L word, love.
Oh, I see.
And it's interesting that, we chose not to use that word. And I'm sure we can dig into that for probably an hour in and of itself. But the love word is also something that there's a certain stigma. It's like you're not supposed to use that word when you're talking about heterosexual male friendships, right? But yet we can use the word care, and it's more okay.
Yeah.
But isn't that the same thing? I suppose love can mean erotic love.
Yeah.
Or
that's a great point.
Or some other type of love.
Yes.
But care has a more of a, how to say,
holistic,
perhaps less
approachable.
Erotic.
Yeah, it's approachable.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Which is fair. So I'm fine using that word.
Absolutely.
But really, when we use the word care, it's an expression of love.
It is.
Really, is what it is.
Great way to say it. Sure.
Let's just call a spade a spade.
So maybe even a challenge there to be saying, why did I choose to nuance this expression here? and what word are we going to use? What words are we
Yeah,
going to use so that it's more palpable, and is that even appropriate, for example, as opposed to saying, hey, why can't we express this element here? Why can't we walk into this horizon? So
totally. I think personally, I don't really use this phrase much myself, but I think in theory it would be perfectly fine to be like, Biniam, I
yes,
love you, man.
absolutely,
Right?
absolutely,
Why
yes.
not?
But then here's what most guys are thinking. If I'm hearing and remembering what most would say, that sounds gay when you say that, right? And they're sort of like they have a heightened sense of awareness and saying, "I'm not walking there. I'm not expressing that way." So there are many I would suggest that are saying, this I'm afraid is going to lead to this assumption from others. And so I want to stay away from that, kind of guard myself from those like judgments or those ways of
Which
dismantling.
which is fair,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the context that they live
True,
in.
true,
In
true.
some, they may be projecting something onto the context that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They may be perceiving something that does exist.
Yeah.
Or, in my scenario and our scenario, I think that if any of us used any of those terminologies, we'd be like, that's fine, that's cool. I don't think that there would be any discomfort here. But it's easy for us to say that.
Yeah.
Me to
And
say
I'll
that,
say
right?
it's easy for us because of the context that we're in.
Exactly.
And we'll get to that in just a
Yes.
moment. But let me
Yeah.
give Frank a chance to chime in.
Oh, I don't have much to say other than that I agree.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, I think our dynamic, I think there's a lot of like, I guess, non-weirdness around using the L word to describe feelings for each other. But there is that stigma that's out there, and I think that a lot of male friendships would struggle with that particular choice of words. But I agree. Like, why not? Why not? And maybe that could be something that ultimately becomes more commonplace. But society is what it is right now.
Sure.
And I hope that we can kind of um, embrace being a bit more vulnerable around those expressions.
When you guys started talking about the L word, I was thinking lesbian. And I was like, maybe they're appropriating that to guys, which would be gay, right? But that's not what you guys are saying. You're referencing the word love. I'm like, okay, this is a different turn there. But even then, you said something really interesting, Frank, that I want to explore just a little bit, and that is, it is really helpful. And I think Josh actually touched on this too. It's important to consider the context in which we're living culturally, right? So there are some countries legitimately around the world where there are different expressions of love where it is nothing wrong to like walk around hand in hand like this, and you're just kind of walking your gay way along that way, right?
Right.
And then imagine that individual coming into this context and it's attempting the same thing, coming in for a kiss, and being very close in their expression that way, and learning in a really quick way what is out of bounds and what is not going to be tolerated in this cultural context. So yes, it is important to consider the cultural context, because the thing is, when we're communicating but not aware of how our communication can be received on the other end, what tends to happen is usually there's ships sailing by each other in the middle of the night, right? So the awareness piece is really important, I would say, Frank, like you were mentioning, because to communicate, the best kind of communication is when you meet at some point where you're saying, I understand your intentions and what your thoughts are, and vice versa, right? And so if you're not aware of what cultural context we're in, and you just kind of bulldoze your way forward, you're still going to miss the intention for what you're trying to communicate. Maybe you really care for this individual and want to express that by knowing where their frame is at and how to be able to approach them, right? A silly example for me would be as an Uber driver when I was driving early in the morning. Now, this morning on my other podcast, I was pretty cheerful, and I had a few comments from some of my listeners. They're like, "You're like really energetic in the morning." I'm like, "All right." I usually have to watch my energy in the morning, especially as an Uber driver, because those who I'm picking up are just waking up and they don't respond well to enthusiastic, kind of thing. I have to like tone it down, not change me, but tone it down to be aware of how can I communicate with this individual so I don't turn them off? What's going to be helpful and necessary for them to be able to move forward along that line? So that's really important consideration in this expression, especially amongst men, of, hey, wherever you're at, how do you communicate your desire? And how are you also aware of those limiting cultural factors that are tempting and almost coercing you to play along a certain narrative, right? So that's a really important point, I think, there too. Yeah. Okay, so Joshua, you are like, I think Frank and I would happily acknowledge you are a unique specimen of guys. So if you don't know, Joshua is the one in our friend group. He is sculpted physically. Okay, I'm trying to feel happy for him in his giftings physically. Like he's just like he can take his shirt off at a beach with no problem, and you'll have like women salivating just by looking at him. Okay,
It'll be like the Axe commercial, right?
but here's the contrast, though. He's that way, and I described that part first because there's many other of the male species who are in that same mold, physically that is, well sculpted, who are not Joshua. So Joshua is that way, but he's also accessible. He is approachable, right? And maybe it's because of your professional career as a counselor and you know how to engage. And he's manly as well, right? Like I know a lot of people would say, are you like somewhere on the gaydar? Because like your mannerisms, there's a lot of feminine showing there, and it's very intentional. We'll talk about that in a bit. But you're also like man's man as well. But you're approachable. You're sculpted. You have this way of bringing people in, and they feel in, right? How do you go about, like with all these things going in your benefits, engaging and connecting in the way that you do with other men to establish this different way of engaging that is unknown to most other men? I'm setting you up here. Yes.
That's a big question.
Okay.
How do I do that? Well, first of all, thank you for
yes,
the plug or whatever the term you use there. How do I still connect with
you? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is you've got so many things going for you, Joshua, and yet you don't follow the mold of most guys who look like you. You make a space where you're able to get right in the way you express and establish connections with other men.
I don't think it has anything to do with physicality. I think it has everything to do with just my care and desire to connect deeply with people and learning the tools and techniques and how to do that.
Okay.
And in many cases, trial and error, and sometimes, some cases through training, schooling, etc. Just, I don't know what else to say.
You communicate like everyone else communicates, but you don't play by the rules that most play by. What is it
I'm able to be more intentional, and deliberate and specific on how I want to connect with people and who I want to connect with.
Sure, you're particular about that.
And I love that intentionality. I think not being in a place of vulnerability helps a lot. So there's a lot of points of, I'll use the word confidence.
Sure.
Where does confidence come from? Hold on a moment.
Yeah.
Where does confidence come from? It comes from years of experience and knowing where I'm at and what I have to offer people, and I don't know, just experience, knowledge of how to interact with men, knowing that I have something to offer and that ultimately it's their choice. I'm not, again, I use the word vulnerability. I'm not.
You mentioned two things there, Joshua. You mentioned the word confidence, and then you mentioned the word vulnerability. I can imagine in the minds of many
how are
those two sound
connected?
Paradoxical.
Yes.
Vulnerability makes most people feel weak and exposed, but you're saying confidence with expressions of vulnerability. Tie those two in a way that makes sense if you are able.
Absolutely. So the more that we're vulnerable about certain aspects of our life, the less vulnerable they become.
I see. So you're almost like saying expose it.
So when I use the word vulnerable, I actually mean aspects of myself that I'm just like, here's who I am. Gotcha. Here's my limitations. Gotcha. Here's what I'm looking for, whatever it is. Yeah. And it may sound to many to be vulnerable. I would say the same thing very much so with yourself, Vinum, in that you are able to disclose some personal, deeper things.
Sure.
And many people would listen and say, oh, that's so vulnerable. Sure. That's very courageous of you. And it is. And I don't want to negate that.
Sure.
But over time, it gets just to be the point where it's just like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I do. It's no longer vulnerable. It's like if someone takes that piece of information or that share and abuses it, it's like, That's okay.
Gotcha.
It's not okay, but it's not going to destroy me.
That's right.
So therefore,
I
I'm not
flex
weak
that. Right. I
in
see
those areas. Does
So
that make sense?
it's a paradox again that you're describing. You're saying through the expressions of vulnerability and practicing that, it eventually becomes your strength and your confidence.
Absolutely.
And you're continuing to still find ways of communicating vulnerability, which is an integral part of bonding and connecting.
100%.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe we can do a whole other Maybe we did. I'm trying to remember a podcast on the topic of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Did we do one on that? I forget.
I'm gonna have to check again.
Yeah,
I think we kind of touched on it in some contexts.
Yeah.
Vulnerability and friendships, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think in all connections, I think it's important that I shouldn't say all connections. I mean, business relationships, whatever. You don't have to there. You know what I mean? But if there's some sort of a friendship, some sort of a relationship developed, you need something where there's at least a minimum level of vulnerability there. And in order to be open to do that, you have to have that confidence. A decent amount of confidence, sort of a base level of confidence. I see that. Does that make sense?
Good. It's a very big clue that I'm hearing. And thank you for giving me an answer because it kind of helps me with my answer too. That's really helpful. Confidence is I don't know. I'll probably suggest those two key elements there. Almost key elements of saying how do you express vulnerability, because it is a big vulnerable step to express interest in someone else. Why do I think that? I think it's so because you don't know, you're not guaranteed of the response unless you've built a rapport there, right? So when you reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm interested, can I learn more about you, can I understand, that's a big you're almost like saying, give me a piece of you as I'm willing to give a piece of myself. There's the vulnerability piece mixed with the confidence as well. That exchange of ourselves in a really heartfelt way is huge. And when you get into the heart, emotions, feelings, that's when the things get like, oh boy, what is the masculine thing that we're signing up for, where we culturally aren't supposed to be that mushy, if you will, right? So there's just some themes in there as well.
For me, it's sort of like there's this common vulnerability that leads to bonding. There's sort of like oh hey, like here's something that we've both struggled through that we can relate with.
Right.
That to me is just like a strong bonding. I definitely don't think all vulnerability is good. I think there's people that overshare and emotionally dump. And that becomes a toxic vulnerability, right?
Dumping or broadcasting.
Or if you're broadcasting your sob story to everyone,
let me just slow you down.
That's different, right?
Break that down for our listeners. What do you mean when you're saying if you're oversharing? I'm thinking of those who are like, oh crap, I don't know if I'm oversharing. What does that look like?
It's sort of. I think it's sort of like when you're sort of like looking for pity.
Okay.
From other people.
I see.
As opposed to being like, I'm just going to authentically share something about myself. In hopes of creating bond and in creating camaraderie, and in hopes of it, exposing a part of myself that maybe I might feel shame about, or something I've struggled with, but not coming from a place of attention seeking, but coming from a place of of bonding.
Good point.
And that kind of like, I think that follows with confidence,
right? Rather
than following it with being more vulnerable after, because I don't know. I think there's a difference there. I'm not a psychologist, but I think that I think it's very different, kind of the way you approach it.
Frank, when would it be inappropriate to express vulnerability?
I think, I think if you're sort of like, kind of like always vulnerable, like always emotionally dumping on someone, and you're never really, I don't know that there's any kind of like net positive effect, or if you're just like, you're just like using it as an attention seeking kind of exercise. Repeating myself, but I think that's kind of like the kind of vulnerability that's like, what's the end goal here?
Sure, that's a good question.
Are you opening it up?
I like that.
So that people get to know you, or are you opening it up because
you want to give a perception that isn't really?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I don't know. I'm not really describing it well, but
You're reminding me of something else, Frank.
mm-hmm.
So, like on my platforms, one of the things I was very upfront about, and I also do this in my personal romantic relationships. So, for those of you who don't, my friends know this, but for those of you who don't know, I follow a pretty radical way of proceeding, which is not accessible for a lot of people because it's that level of maybe this is not appropriate because I may not be able to handle the ramifications of what comes after this kind of a sharing. Same thing I do also on my online social platforms where I say, I would love for me to have influence with you with the content that I produce and so on. And yet, before you do sign up for following my content, I want you to know what you're signing up for. And so, at the very outset of my platform content creation, I pretty much put my whole story out there. Why? Because I'm saying I almost feel like a politician. And we've had this conversation. I want to put my whole story out there so you can figure out, am I someone that you can follow or be influenced by? Exactly. And I don't want any surprises to come where you're like, I bought into you, but now that I know about your story, this is kind of like outside it. So that was my way of doing it. And yet I discourage my followers from saying, please don't do what I did. I have a reason for why I did what I did.
Yeah.
And I'd want to encourage them in their own context to find those safe places amongst their friendship, their families, their professional seeking of help. I definitely encourage those expressions and say, what does that look like for you to learn how to communicate and to expose and to grow through and change, towards something better as you're continuing to evolve as a person.
But
right?
I don't think you're looking to do it for like group acceptance or validation.
Exactly.
Right.
That's really, I think that's 100% the dividing difference there.
Help me understand.
Well, when you project or broadcast some difficult emotional stuff in a very like group setting, and you're doing it because you want to get people to kind of just say, "Oh, woe is you, you're the victim," pat you on the back, then
I have no stomach for that.
Or whatever the emotion you're struggling with. I mean, there's a variety of different emotions. It's like, oh yes, you are the victim. You've been wronged. That's difficult, etc., etc. Versus like, I mean, there are people that will say, for example, on social media, I lost my partner, or something happened to them that they just want to let people know. And of course, they're going to get a lot of positive well wishes back. That's not necessarily broadcasting.
No. It's legitimate seeking of support.
Well, they're not necessarily seeking support, or maybe they are in a more justifiable sense. It's more like, here's a communicating what's going on, letting you guys in a little bit. You're doing that. You're like, when you're communicating your story, you're saying, here, just to let you in.
Yes.
I'm not doing this, you're saying, because I want everyone to say, oh, I feel you, and oh, thank you for being that amazing truth teller. Oh, you're such a wonderful person. That's not why you're doing it. Do some people say that? Maybe. Probably not that many. But that's, regardless of whether that's how they respond or not, that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it just to be truthful.
Sure. I see that.
So it's all about the motives, I think, behind it. And also, I think, to some degree, it's the context, the crowd that you're doing it to. So, for example, if you're doing it in a one-on-one setting, then you have the opportunity to have that back and forth and have that, tell me more about this. Help me understand your emotions. Tell me understand this, and this. And it's perfectly fine to want to get that support in that context, right? But wanting all of those just simple, almost devoid of personal connection, oh, I feel bad for you, oh, you've been a victim kind of thing, that's not helpful.
I also think, like, what you do, Binyam, is you really take ownership over, like, hey, these are the mistakes I've made, or here's something I've struggled with, and it's really hard, but hey, like, here's the positives, and here are the things here's my new outlook on life, and here's how I'm tackling this this challenge, right?
Sure.
So it doesn't end on a note of being like, oh, poor me. You're taking full, accountability and ownership over the things that you've been through, and you're striving for something better, something bigger, right? So it's, I think, what you're doing online and in our personal settings
Mm-hmm.
is not what I was talking about. I hope
Mm-hmm.
you didn't come
Not at
across
all.
that way.
I wanted that contrast.
Yeah, yeah,
I wanted that
yeah.
contrast of saying, I
But
appreciate
I
what I'm
think there
hearing.
are people that simply are looking for that
Sure enough.
that kind of like pat on the back
Sure.
and pat on the head.
Sure.
And I've seen it numerous times where like you get the same story every time you see them,
Sure enough.
and the same kind of outcome.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and it seems like this is not the healthiest way to express
Gotcha.
vulnerability. But I think we got sidetracked.
That's
We're
okay.
talking about vulnerability.
This is a part of this conversation. I would still say it's a pretty significant part, and I'm going to shift into a little bit more specific expressions of what we want to dispel. But before I do, let's just take a quick break here so I can get my pat on the back from both you gentlemen. Come on, there we go. Okay, speaking of pats on the back, there we go.
I feel so sorry for you.
And then secondly, we haven't had a chance yet to feature Frank Socks. Friends,
and the mustache.
And the mustache. So we're on battery power on my computer because I forgot their plug-in. So before we lose the opportunity, let's go ahead and feature Frank's fantastic. He has these.
They're a bit out of focus.
Yes, these are Frank's socks today.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, now we got to do a vote around the table.
Okay, here we go.
Do I lose the stash?
Or do we join you on the stash? Oh! What do you think, Joshua?
Given that I live in 2021, I'm going to hold on to the full.
The thing is, my head is full of hair, and the beard will come back.
It will.
You know, yeah. There's an endless supply.
True.
There's an endless supply. That's right.
Oh my goodness. Oh, and it is November right now, so he's in season.
It's perfect.
And you and I don't know. I almost feel like this not obligation. It's not obligation because that would be wrong, but the sense of like camaraderie, saying, "Hey, brother, I totally like face public ire."
So just for context, I had to shave my beard for a Halloween costume, but I kept the greasy stash. So
well, were you dressed up as?
Here we are. I was dressed up as Victor Sullivan from Uncharted.
Alongside your dear friend. And
yes, my son and my dear friend. They were dressed up as Nathan Drake and Chloe Fraser.
That's
from
amazing.
The same video game.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Oh, man.
But yeah, now I'm stuck with this stash. So
I wish we could feature Joshua's costume. So Joshua, tell us a little bit about your costume. It's just a bit of a breaker, but
right. I started off as a zombie doctor.
Yep.
And as I
put it together
myself, I created it. I drew using markers and such.
Very well
on
done.
A white shirt.
Yes.
I gradually decided, well, I should probably put a name tag on there. That'd be kind of doctors wear name tags. So I did, and then as I did that, sure.
Okay. Here's a picture of Joshua.
I put Frank's name on there because he's a doctor.
Can you see that right there?
Though not a
if you have a heart attack,
surgeon,
don't count on me.
But I put his name on there on the name tag, and then I figured, what the heck? Might as well find a picture, print it off, and I put that on the name tag.
It was amazing. Zombie Frank.
So what started off as Zombie Doctor turned into Zombie Frank.
Zombie Dr. Frank, yeah, because he's like, intellectual here. So that was amazing. Thanks for that little segue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to shift the conversation. So I would still say that this theme of confidence and see, guys, what I love in our conversations is we're thinking at a level, we're trying to be scrutinizing our ideas, and we don't take it easy on each other. We will challenge each other's perspectives. But we're trying to present it to the core of what our experiences have brought us to, engaging and understanding a certain subject. So even as we're talking about how can guys grow in their care for each other in challenging cultural norms and so on, that's a significant piece of the pie from my experience, right? The confidence piece that exudes, because I mean that's already a masculine attribute, versus the vulnerability, which is considered more feminine. Right, and so there's even that component of how do you sort of have that balance between those gender assigned characteristics, if you will. So if I can move a little bit now, I want us to start considering some expressions that probably we would not buy into, that say here's what it means to be a man and how you should act in the context of friendships and what you would replace that with. Here's what you've observed culturally that says, hey, here's, for example, you don't do this, and so you do this, and here's why I don't buy into this, because I think this is the important part that we need to be focusing enhancing, becoming aware of. What are some of those expressions? I'm happy to go first if you guys want.
Yeah.
I think that the couple that come to my mind.
Yes.
First one is physical touch.
Okay.
And I don't mean sexual touch, of course.
Right, because that's a different category.
That's a different category for sure. But like putting your arm around your friend and giving them a hug.
Right.
I mean, it's as simple as a hug.
Yes.
But honestly, it could even be, holding hands. It could be
cuddling,
perhaps. Yeah. All of those, if one's comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, comfort is really the underlying topic here. Is like, okay, well, can we switch it up? Can we challenge these societal norms?
Yeah.
And the discomfort is the biggest barrier in stopping us from doing that.
Yes.
And I would say that for myself and for a lot of the people that I spend time with, we're very comfortable challenging that norm.
Absolutely.
Especially the cuddle touch norm. It's
so we've created this community, this ethos in our gatherings where it's like, this is normalized.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because with not all women, a lot of women in the cultural norm, they are, fine cuddling each other.
Yeah. But that's considered feminine.
That's right. But why? Like,
again,
there's
this is why we're
good
talking
reason
about that.
here,
Absolutely.
right?
So that's
I mean,
a good observation.
There's one, which is maybe that women are softer than guys, so maybe they make better pillows in the cuddle world. I don't know.
Women smell nicer than guys.
Okay, there's something to be said about that. So good hygiene is important. Yes. But no, that's true. That's true. And I like to include that word normalizing, because one is saying, why do we play along this? So what is the observation you're wanting to displace, that you're saying this is a point for you? What do you see happening amongst men in the way that they connect in reference to physical touch?
Don't touch.
And why do you think, what do you think is driving that though?
I think discomfort. Okay. I think, which is driven by the norm that don't do that, because if you do that, people will look down on you. People will, perhaps the guy will use violence, perhaps something along those lines. Other people will perceive you negatively, or just overall, people are gonna perceive you as being gay, which is the worst possible thing to be perceived. Yeah. And from my point of view, in contrast, I'm like, I'm not gay. I'm heterosexual.
Sure enough.
And I have nothing wrong with people who are gay. I'm spend time with, have some good friends with bisexual and homosexual people.
Sure.
And I don't really care if someone wants to perceive me as being gay. Go ahead.
Right.
No skin off my back.
So there's a lot of fear also of what others are going to think of you and how you're going to lose your place in the community.
That's right.
Because you're going to be presumed in a category that you are fearful of.
That's right.
And perhaps also the fact that those in homosexual orientations and bisexual orientations are still stigmatized culturally. There's a lot of openness now to it.
It's becoming more open. Depends on the circle.
True enough. That's a really helpful way to put it. But again, why we're talking about that again, to say, here's one observation we're saying, we see this, but why are we not signing up for it? And why do we want to displace it to this? Why do you bring this up? Why is it important to consider for yourself personally displacing this expression culturally to saying this is more, I find more merit in here?
Because I think that there can be a lot of benefit to touch amongst friends. There can be a lot of communication of desire and care in that context. And
in a platonic way, that's lost.
In a platonic way, and then so there's the benefits, and then the not only the addition of benefits, but the subtraction of possible consequences, which is, if I accidentally walk by you and my hand touches your butt, oh no, it's the end of the world. It's like, well, I don't care. I'll just slap it harder. Now it's like I don't have that care.
Yes,
it doesn't matter to me.
Now, Joshua, I think we resonate along those lines because we've actually talked about and intentionally sort of approached this to push against the current this way. However, I would say most may not be here yet. How do you shift in this perspective with those who are not here yet?
First of all, decide, is it worthwhile trying to or wanting to?
Sure.
Just because this is mine or our
Sure. Yeah.
desired expression of care towards other males doesn't mean that it's a necessity.
Sure.
So first of all,
That's a good
decide
point.
if you want to, if it's worthwhile.
Is that you?
Yes, is it you? Secondly, make sure that your context does actually allow it, as we've talked before, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's easier for me to say it's nice, and we have been able to open up that door, but some contexts aren't. And then find a good way of gradually moving into it. It will feel awkward and uncomfortable,
out of place
at first, because it's unfamiliar. Everything that is unfamiliar feels uncomfortable at first. So just because it feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad. Like it just means it's new.
You're saying just the same way with expressions of vulnerability. Over time, you get better at it. That it becomes your strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. That's good.
Yeah.
Frank, what are your thoughts on
that? I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I haven't. I mean, I'm very open to touching and hugging with my male friends. I don't think I've ever done an extended cuddle, but not opposed to it.
Sure enough.
I have to be kind of like, I think for me, certain like specific people that I'm more comfortable with than others.
Sure.
But yeah, I agree that there's, it would be healthy for society to try and like move into that direction of showing care for your.
You're saying it would be good for them to consider because it's a healthier option, or?
No, I think that there's a lot of benefit to be gained from it.
Sure.
I think that you can have a sort of a deeper bond with your guy friends.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of like I think just like a nonverbal way of connecting with someone that you can feel a lot closer with someone when you've had that experience.
Now, in that consideration, I just want to clarify again a couple of things. One, it may not be everyone's form of expression this way, right? So we're saying, hey, if it's not your form of expression, you're just not that. We're not saying you have to conform to this way here, but what does it look like for you to become more open in the accessibility of a variety of ways of expressing connection by challenging the norms, like this one here that we're saying, that diminish or sort of mute the desire to express that connection.
Yeah, I have another one. Just like having a discussion around, emotionally checking in with each other.
Yes.
Okay. Before you just pause that for a second.
Okay.
One more thing I want to say. The second piece I wanted to say is consent. Is really important.
Yes.
Consent is a really important part, especially on the physical realm, because, for example, amongst our group of friends that we spend time with, hey, it's like we come in, we sit on the couch, we cuddle with one another. It doesn't matter, guy, girl, or guy. Like all that is beautiful. It's a fantastic expression of our care for one another. When newcomers come into our midst to hang out with us, they can palpably sense and experience the closeness that we thrive on. And so, but the key thing there is having those conversations, saying, what are you comfortable with or not? May I hug you? May I sit beside you? May I come as close as I would like to? You're having those conversations, especially because for those who are not quite there yet, it may be something really awkward, and so that's one of the things that we would feel confident expressing and saying, I would like to do this, but may I have your permission? Are you comfortable with this? If not, I would like to negotiate about what your comfort level is, right? So that's one of the ways that I feel about combating, is having that communication piece to say, here's my desire for this purpose. Like we've had those conversations, and it's a beautiful way of extending to someone, saying, hey, it may feel awkward, but let's embrace that awkwardness, right? Let's do it together. So
consent and expression.
Absolutely. Okay, carry on with yours. So
just like in emotions checking, I think that guys never talk about emotions, minimize emotions, and that I think that male friendships could be strengthened.
Yes.
By having open dialogue about like how do you feel? What's your emotion around this or that, or like maybe something was said, maybe something happened, maybe something that made you feel really great, or something that made you feel really upset, or something that made you feel sad or left out.
Yeah.
Like these kind of conversations that I think rarely happen in a lot of male friendship circles, or between one-on-one male friendships. And it's sort of like, the emphasis is often on minimizing any kind of emotional impact of anything that happens. So yeah, I think that then men struggle with emotional intelligence because of these situations and because of this dynamic. So I think that it would be just even like good practice, even for general life situations, just to be able to understand what you're feeling, and how to choose how to react to it and choose how to communicate about it.
Now, Frank, why do you think most guys, I mean, most people in general, but specifically guys, why do you think they struggle with this zone here? What is the narrative they're signing up for, and why is that vacant in your perspective?
I think it's simply the societal norms of basically having to be that sort of rock solid kind of anchor in a family or in a group that isn't phased or impacted by things that are going on around them, and that they can stay kind of like steadfast and kind of be that rock solid foundation that everyone else can lean on. But the reality is, I think that men are just as emotional as women and other genders. And I think that they lose touch with that. So yeah, I think it comes from just the way that we're pigeonholed into these gender roles, all the way back to children. I think I don't think emotional intelligence or emotional check-ins are taught to young boys, and certainly those kind of masculine ideas are perpetuated in boys and in friendships that they have. And I mean, certainly when I was growing up, anybody that would cry or show any kind of sign of weakness was immediately put down, made fun of, pointed and laughed at.
Sure enough.
This is not okay.
That's good.
And I think that continues into adulthood.
I like what you're saying too. Just because we're guys, it's not that we're void of this sector of wanting to express and feel those emotions, right? And it's inside this place that is a vulnerable place. Again, there's that word vulnerability, right? It's a vulnerable thing to say, I'm going to expose what's going on in here and here. But the scary part about doing that is when you put it out there, you're not exactly guaranteed what others that you're sharing that with are going to do with that, right? They could take that very sacred thing that you're sharing and, like you're saying,
they could minimize it. They could make fun of you.
Right.
They could blow you off.
Right.
They could get weird and uncomfortable and stop talking to you.
Sure.
And so it's a big risk to open up to someone. And so it's like, how do you? I don't know. Like, how do you start to change those norms? How do you start to change those dynamics?
That's a great question.
With your friend group or with new friendships that you make.
I've seen that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where that can start to change.
I want to talk about that towards the end here in the last few minutes, because that's a really important question. And that's kind of like, here we are experiencing what we're experiencing. We're sharing our experiences because we're saying we've experienced a richness, we've experienced a maturing, we've experienced a foundationalizing component in our togetherness that continues to enable us to build in some beautiful ways along the way that we perceive most may not have that experience. And so we're basically saying, here's us wanting to talk about, model, and process what we're experiencing and observing for the consideration of you to be able to say, what could that look like on your end, right? But what would that look like for you to go start from wherever you're at? And we're going to address that because that's a really, really important point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'd even go a little further to say, from my frame of reference, the desire to communicate is human. It's one of our human components. How do we communicate and express? It's like one of those survival things that we need to do along the way, right? How do you say, stop, I'm not interested? Or how do you say, I want? Or how do you go about, connecting with others to express your needs, your thoughts, your feelings, the things that are going to help you move to the next level wherever you're at. So that's a really good core component. But when we hamper that communication by saying, I'm not going to give myself permission, I'm not going to give myself that extension of expressing that is going to holistically help me serve myself and care for myself, you're going to deplete yourself. Like, it's almost like, I would suggest dehumanizing. Dehumanizing, and in a way, you're taking the communication piece away, and that's driven for us guys, especially because of those cultural perspectives that say big boys don't cry, for example, or toughen up, don't be a pussy. I mean, these are just some of the phrases over here along the way to say, put on this hard shell that we have adopted culturally as masculine to say we are rigid, we do not have these kind of weaknesses, these vulnerabilities. We don't wrestle with that. We always operate from a vantage point, 24/7 of strength, of you. I'm untouchable that way, right? And that's what we sort of cultivate, and that really diminishes that element of growth emotionally, right? Which runs into trouble when you start having not only male friendships, but even relationships with the opposite sex, right? To be able to say, how can you express that side of your humanity? This is your humanity, I would suggest. This is your humanity, you being given an opportunity to express its existence, saying, hey, this is what it means to be me. I'm not certain about this answer. I don't know which way to go here. I'm afraid about this. I'm worried about this. I am wrestling with this. I'm anxious. All those kind of things, that again is a big vulnerable thing for everyone, but especially amongst guys, right? So I love your answer.
What you're saying, and there's so much. This could be 2 podcasts. This topic alone.
Yeah.
But expressing I'm anxious, or I'm whatever I am feeling, I'm confused, I'm struggling, I'm whatever that. So first of all, there's different degrees of emotions in terms of vulnerability. So I'm angry. It's not very vulnerable. I feel rejected. Pretty vulnerable. Right. And I also want to say kind of a balancing thing about this topic, which is to say that, yes, of course, men not talking about their emotions and is not ideal. I mean, you can have good friendships where you just tell stories and you do activities. That's fine. I don't want to negate that there are some good friendships like that out there, but they're missing out on the benefit of, as we were talking, emotions and being more open about what's going on inside of you, whether more or less vulnerable. But also, I think we have to acknowledge that there's a perhaps hidden sense of danger. If I let out these emotions, what's going to happen? Am I going to be like those crazy people out there that start to, for example, broadcast, oh, woe is me, I'm the worst person, I'm a victim, blah, blah, blah. That's not healthy. That's an emotional expression, and it's not healthy, which we just described. Another one is, blaming and projecting on other people. It's also an expression of emotion that is not healthy. So we need to, I think, educate and talk with these men and women for that matter, but we're talking about men here in this context, about being able to talk about your emotions, but in a healthy, good way. Like, I'm feeling this. It's not, this happened and you said this. I'm feeling this as a result of that. I'm not saying you did it or that you're causing my feelings, but I'm feeling as a result of it. That's an example of like owning your emotions and having good, healthy dialogue about what's going on, right?
Yeah, so good.
So it's constructive, but not like confrontational or just an emotional dump.
That's right. That's right. And the other thing too is, do we talk about our emotions in the context of life? Like, I went to work and such happened and I felt this way. Or are we talking about emotions between us? Both are good. Both are healthy. But one is harder to do, more difficult, and not. So all this is to say, I mean, for men who are looking to do this more, there's a way to ease into it.
That's a good point.
And so keep that in mind. It's not just like immediately you have to say that, when you're around me, I feel inadequate. Maybe that's not the best way to start, right?
I like what you're saying, and it's kind of doubling on what Frank was saying earlier. that we're probably in a different place, but we didn't just snap our way into where we're presently at. We had to grow into it. We had to have our own awkward conversations and our own awkward experiences to say.
I think it takes a certain level of trust.
Yeah.
And I think you can, start small kind of thing. And I think you can kind of build on that.
Sure.
And as it becomes normalized, it becomes easier. But yeah, I think you have to be constructive. You have to be coming from a place of like, not confrontation or finger pointing or blaming and that sort of thing. But just sort of like,
or internalizing for that matter.
Or internalizing, yeah. This is how I feel, and what are some ways that we can address that? But yeah, it's just, I think normalizing those kind of dynamics, I think, would go even for little things. I think would go a long way in strengthening bonds between friends.
So let's, as we're landing the plane here in the last 5-7 minutes here, I want you to think about a helpful starting place from your best perspective here. Where would you talk to some of our listeners? Let's start at the very beginning point here. Let's say they're in the middle of, this is all great to me. I never considered like challenging these ways that I've operated and signed up for in the way I see this. So you're opening a new horizon that I never thought about before. How do I start talking about this when I've got no one in my community who's on the same schedule, and I'm operating in this community now, and I want to maybe experience something of what we're experiencing here? Where would we suggest a good starting place would be for them in their progression towards incrementally growing through and seeing something of a shift?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, just like throwing ideas out.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. Like maybe every time you see your friends, ask them how they're feeling. They don't have to say much. I don't know. It's just an idea. Like, are you feeling happy? Are you feeling energized? Are you feeling upset? And it doesn't have to be much.
Right.
Yeah. Or expressing how you're feeling instead of
like, I'm feeling angry today.
And normalizing that.
Normalizing that it's okay for me to express how I'm feeling. It doesn't have to be more than a couple of words. And that maybe then that can start to ignite some conversations.
It's a great starting point. I think also when we consider whatever the starting point is, we have to consider who we're starting with.
Yeah.
And that they vary in terms of their availability and therefore safety to have these kinds of conversations. And so, but I think that, especially if we're raised in a culture, in a context where expressing emotions is a faux pas, we will probably lean on the side of assuming nobody wants it, rather than on the side of, yes, people want it more than they actually do. Right?
It's a safer
so I would say, try it out, test it out. Some people you might think, oh, I don't think this person's safe. You may be right. You may actually be right, but give it a go, see what happens.
Yeah.
And if they're not safe, then maybe don't do that again, or try a little pull back a little bit and try something a little less vulnerable or a little something else, right? And then also just keep, I guess, if you have to, meet new people, practice with a therapist, use your family who are there no matter what kind of, or at least supposed to be safe with. And try that out, right? With some, a mother, father, sibling, whatever it is, right? There's options for sure. And I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Binyam? What are some ways of starting?
So I'm thinking sequentially, a great starting place is awareness. Like you're like, okay, I think I want to experience something, what you guys are experiencing. I'm aware that where I'm presently at. The awareness piece is really helpful, saying, here's what I'm observing. And in that awareness is, why do you want to shift? Like a question we were talking about here as we're sharing some of the things that were like, this is what I observe, and I'm shifting it to this way of operating from this. But the question I was asking was why? Why did you find this more compelling than this, right? So start considering in your observation and awareness as you're watching your community that you're navigating in, what are those things and why would you want to shift? Why are you seeing that this is not as compelling as what could be over here? And what do you want to start expressing? And then secondly, as you're growing in that awareness piece, the patience piece is a really critical one. A big shift is not to do a U-turn in a pinpoint. A ship takes a long way to shift its course and turn around again, right? So consider that approach as well, to as you're also going through this shift. And it's not only you going through the shift, but it's also the community in which you're wanting to engage in. So you might be the avant-garde in this one here, like leading the way for your community as you're moving into it. What does it look like for you to shift and change incrementally? If you're jumping for a huge, all right, guys, this is the new me, and you just kind of do a flip like that, that might be really hard for those around you to be able to calibrate with, And so, what does it look like for you to be measured in your shifts, little bits at a time along the way, right? So you're not overwhelming them saying, guys, you should be this way, right? And then what would it look like as you're observing your community to engage? Where is your starting point with them, Are you going to ask them, hey, guys, can I sit right beside you and hug you and cuddle? Like, or is it a more appropriate place to say, hey, is it okay if I give you a hug right now, man? Just give them the context of the situation and start seeing what that looks like in the incremental shifts that is going to take for your community. Like you were saying, Joshua, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time, right? And so, what does that look like? So, there's a patience piece that follows, I believe, the awareness piece that says, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I want to walk through. And then, thirdly, if I can suggest a third element, and that's the assist from the sidelines. The assist that says, who are those that you're going to have supporting and encouraging along the way? It's a difficult thing to sort of start something new. And if you're all alone in this, that's a challenging place. That can be a discouraging place, especially when you're experiencing more shutdowns and breakthroughs. And so, who are those, like you were mentioning, Josh, maybe family or uncles or distant family or grown-ups, or who are those individuals in your life that that you can say, how can I reach out to them for support this way, and maybe even practice some of these elements with them, and maybe have that collaboration with, because in community it's a lot better when you're able to the collective IQ is what one of my grad profs would say. Tap into the collective IQ. What does it look like for you to sort of know your community well enough and to get some more intel from the sidelines as well? Maybe even talk to girls groups and say, hey, how can I, because I'm not past saying girls do it really well stereotypically, but what are those things that are facilitated? But the fact that you're even considering such a shift that we're talking about is really commendable. And I want to say this is driven by a few of us in society who are trying to live life on purpose, trying to live life on purpose along the way, where we're saying, hey, as I'm moving into this context here, how can I challenge the norms? How can I ask the question, why? Why am I considering doing this versus this? And this is a beautiful thing, because when we are willing to ask these kind of questions, when we're willing to actually walk along this threshold here, it's a step of confidence. It's a bold step, right? In essence, you're saying, I'm willing to put myself on the plank for observation, scrutiny, and ripping apart from others. But in doing so, I have a compelling reason of why. Because I want to experience more flavor in life. I want to experience more purpose. I want to experience more like something powerful, because it is life transforming. Thanks for joining us on this episode, guys. We hope to see you next time. Bye for now. Oh, that was awesome. Thanks, gentlemen. That was